The young girl walked quietly into the grand hall, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The room was filled with polished wooden floors, golden chandeliers, and walls lined with paintings that made everything feel so serious and important. She had always loved music, but she had never played in front of such an intimidating audience. Her fingers itched to touch the piano keys, yet her stomach twisted into knots as she glanced around. The owner of the hall, a man known for his strict ways and sharp tongue, stood near the piano with an air of confidence. He had a way of making people feel small without even speaking harshly, and she could sense his eyes sizing her up. The girl had heard whispers from others about how he enjoyed putting people in awkward positions, testing them just to see how they would fail. Now, she was the next person in his game, though she did not know what he had planned. She could hear faint laughter from some of the attendants, as if they were already expecting her to stumble. Her heart pounded as she approached the piano. She had practiced countless hours in her small room at home, where the world only knew her love for music and not the fear she sometimes felt when performing. Here, in this grand hall, everything felt larger than life, and it seemed as if her confidence from home could easily be swallowed by the intimidating atmosphere. The owner cleared his throat and motioned toward the piano with a smirk. "Go on, play something simple," he said in a tone that seemed to hide a challenge. The words were meant to feel like encouragement, but she could tell there was a mocking edge to them. Her mind raced. Could he really want her to succeed? Or was this just another trick? She took a deep breath and nodded politely, trying to hide the nerves that made her hands tremble. She adjusted the piano bench to the perfect height, her small hands hovering over the keys. The silence in the room seemed heavier than it should have been, like the walls themselves were waiting to judge her. A few people whispered, some with curiosity and some with barely disguised amusement. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, trying to remember all the hours she had spent practicing, all the moments when music had been her escape, her voice, and her comfort. She reminded herself that this was what she loved, and no one could take that away. Opening her eyes, she looked at the keys and then at the audience. The owner leaned back slightly, crossing his arms and raising an eyebrow, clearly waiting for some form of entertainment from her nervousness. She knew he wanted to see her fail, to have that smug smile on his face while everyone else chuckled at her. She felt a flicker of determination. She would show them that music was not something to mock, that it could speak louder than words or ridicule. Her first fingers touched the keys, lightly at first, testing the feel of the piano. She played a few notes to steady herself, listening to the vibrations and letting the familiar sound calm her nerves. Each note reminded her of why she loved playing, of the joy she felt when music flowed naturally from her hands. She could feel the audience's eyes on her, some skeptical, some curious. The owner's eyes were sharp and calculating, as if trying to predict her next mistake. She refused to give him the satisfaction. The girl took another deep breath and focused on the melody she had chosen, a simple tune that carried both innocence and emotion. Her fingers moved over the keys with a growing sense of confidence, each note building upon the last. The sound filled the room, gentle at first, but with a clarity that demanded attention. She began to forget the intimidating surroundings, the whispers, and even the smirk of the owner. In those moments, it was just her and the piano, and the music began to carry her away. She noticed subtle changes in the room. The whispers faded, replaced by quiet attention. The smirk on the owner's face remained, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a hint that he had not expected her to play with such control and feeling. The girl felt a spark of courage. This was her moment to show that talent and passion could shine, even under scrutiny. She let herself enjoy the music, the way it moved through her and filled the space around her. Every note she played seemed to draw more attention. People leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the clarity and emotion she was expressing. The owner shifted his stance, clearly adjusting to a reality he had not anticipated. The girl's confidence grew with each measure, and she found herself connecting with the piano in a way that felt both natural and powerful. Her hands danced across the keys, producing a melody that felt alive, full of both softness and strength. Even as she played, the girl remained aware of the tension in the room. She could sense the subtle judgments, the quiet anticipation of the audience. But she had learned that music could communicate what words could not. It could express courage, emotion, and resilience. She let the notes carry her feelings, the quiet defiance she felt against being mocked, and the joy she found in her own abilities. In that moment, she realized that the piano was more than an instrument. It was her voice, her shield, and her proof of who she was. Time seemed to stretch as she continued. The once intimidating hall felt like a space of connection, where music bridged the gap between her fear and the audience's curiosity. She played not to impress, but to express, letting every note be a statement of her determination and love for music. The owner's eyes remained on her, but his expression was changing, slowly losing the confidence he had started with. By the time she finished the first segment of her performance, the room was quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted. The audience was no longer waiting for her to fail. They were witnessing something unexpected and genuine. The young girl took a moment to breathe, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. She felt a rush of accomplishment and a growing sense of pride. This was only the beginning, but she had already begun to turn the situation around. Walking away from the piano bench for a short pause, she looked at the owner. He was silent, his usual smug expression replaced with a thoughtful look. It was not anger nor amusement but surprise, an acknowledgement that he had underestimated her. The girl knew she had his full attention now, not as someone to mock, but as someone capable of commanding respect through talent and poise. She returned to the piano for the next section, her confidence building. Each note felt easier, more natural. The earlier fear had transformed into focus and creativity. She began to add subtle variations to her tune, delicate embellishments that showcased both skill and emotion. The audience was fully engaged now, drawn into her performance, listening closely to each nuance. Even the attendants who had whispered before now sat silently, captivated by the music. The girl thought about all the times she had practiced alone, believing in herself when no one else noticed. All those quiet moments of dedication, of repetition, of learning to express emotion through sound, were paying off now. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, and every note seemed to reinforce her own belief in her abilities. The piano became an extension of her, a way to speak without words, and to show courage without confrontation. She finished the first part of her performance with a soft chord, letting it linger in the hall. Silence followed for a few moments, but it was different from before. It was not awkward or tense. It was respectful, filled with an unspoken acknowledgement of her talent. The young girl smiled slightly to herself, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had faced a challenge, one meant to humiliate her, and instead, she had found a way to rise above it. This was just the beginning of her story. The first notes had set the stage, but she knew there was more she could show. Her heart was still racing, but now with excitement rather than fear. The audience was ready to hear more, and she was ready to give it. The experience had already transformed her confidence, and she could feel that the owner's expectations were shifting, though he would not admit it out loud. In this hall, under the gaze of those who had doubted her, the young girl discovered the power of staying true to her passion, no matter the obstacles. The young girl's hands hovered over the piano, and she could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. The silence was almost tangible. Everyone was watching, some with curiosity, others with barely hidden amusement, expecting her to make a mistake. She remembered the owner's words, spoken with that mocking tone, and for a moment, a shiver ran through her. But then she reminded herself of why she was there. Music had always been her safe place, the one space where she could express herself fully without fear. Now it was her weapon and her voice. Taking a deep breath, she let her fingers settle on the keys. The first notes she played were light, gentle, almost hesitant, but they carried a quiet confidence. The sound resonated through the hall, catching the attention of everyone present. A few people whispered softly to one another, surprised at how precise and delicate her playing was. The owner leaned forward slightly, studying her, as if trying to catch any sign of weakness. She could feel his gaze, sharp and calculating, but instead of letting it intimidate her, it made her more determined. She began to play a simple melody at first, something familiar and comforting, to ease herself into the performance. Her mind was focused solely on the music, on how each note felt under her fingers. The audience's eyes were fixed on her, but she tried not to notice. She had learned that when performing, the world could feel heavy, and if she let herself think too much about the people around her, it could throw her off. She played not for them, but for herself, letting the music flow naturally. The room, once filled with murmurs and faint laughter, started to quiet down. The initial expectation of failure was slowly fading, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity. Some people exchanged glances, nodding slightly at the talent they were witnessing. The young girl's confidence grew with each passing moment. She could feel the rhythm of the piano under her fingers, guiding her, telling her which direction to take next. The fear she felt at first had begun to transform into a steady focus. The owner, who had been so sure of her failure, now had a different expression on his face. His smirk was gone, replaced by a careful, observant look. He was no longer just mocking her. He was trying to understand how she could be so composed and skilled despite the pressure. The young girl sensed this shift, though she did not let it distract her. She knew that her music spoke louder than words ever could. She began to add subtle variations to the melody, small flourishes that demonstrated her skill without being showy. Each note she played seemed to capture a piece of her spirit, her determination, and her love for music. The audience leaned in, captivated by the unexpected depth of her performance. The whispers and chuckles that had followed her at first were gone, replaced by quiet admiration. Even those who had come to see her fail were now caught up in the beauty of her playing. The girl could feel the energy in the room changing. It was no longer just a challenge or a test. It had become a shared experience. The music connected her to the people watching, even the owner, who was now silent, carefully listening to each note. She allowed herself to feel the emotion of the melody, letting it guide her fingers across the keys. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were a reflection of her courage, her resilience, and her passion. As she continued, her hands moved more freely, and the melody grew richer and more expressive. The piano seemed to respond to her, amplifying her emotions and carrying them throughout the hall. She was no longer thinking about the fear of being mocked or the weight of the owner's gaze. She was fully immersed in the music, and it was as if the world outside the piano had ceased to exist. Every note told a story, every chord spoke of her journey, and every pause allowed the audience to feel the depth of her expression. People in the audience began to lean forward, drawn in by the unexpected skill and emotion of the performance. Some closed their eyes to better experience the music, letting it wash over them. Even the owner's expression softened, though he tried to maintain a composed demeanor. The girl noticed the subtle change and allowed it to inspire her, pushing her to play with even more feeling and clarity. She wanted to show them that her talent was real, that it could not be diminished by doubt or ridicule. She started to experiment slightly, introducing delicate shifts in tempo and dynamics, creating a sense of movement and emotion that went beyond the simple tune she had begun with. Each transition felt natural, each note intentional. The audience was captivated, sensing the story behind the music. They were witnessing not just skill, but heart, and it was impossible to look away. The young girl felt a quiet thrill as she realized that she had captured their attention completely. The owner shifted slightly in his seat, clearly trying to regain his composure. He had expected her to stumble, to play nervously, and to confirm his judgment. Instead, she was commanding the room with her music. The girl sensed his surprise but did not let it shake her. She had learned long ago that confidence came from within, not from the approval of others. Her focus remained on the piano, on the sound, and on the story she was telling through each note. With every passing moment, her performance became more fluid and expressive. The simple melody she had started with had evolved into a piece that carried emotion, skill, and subtle complexity. She felt a connection with the piano, as if it understood her thoughts and feelings. Her fingers danced over the keys with grace, precision, and intent. The audience was completely engaged now, and even those who had doubted her talent were silent, captivated by the transformation unfolding before them. The girl's breathing was steady, her heart racing with excitement rather than fear. She felt the music lifting her, carrying her above the initial anxiety and turning it into strength. The notes seemed to echo her courage, her determination, and her unwavering love for the art. She knew that this performance was more than just a response to mockery. It was a declaration of her identity and her skill. Music had always been her refuge, and now it was her triumph. She glanced briefly at the owner, who was watching her closely. There was a flicker of admiration in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. The audience, too, was fully absorbed, experiencing the emotions she conveyed through each chord. The young girl felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet joy in knowing that she had overcome the initial intimidation. She was no longer just a girl in a grand hall. She was a musician, telling her story through the piano. The room seemed to hold its breath as she played on, the music weaving a spell that silenced all doubt. Her fingers moved with confidence, finding the perfect balance between technique and feeling. Every note was a reflection of her dedication, every chord an expression of her heart. She could sense the audience's admiration growing, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine appreciation. Even the owner was caught in the power of her performance, unable to mask the respect forming in his eyes. As the piece progressed, she began to add subtle nuances that made the music even more captivating. Small pauses, gentle variations, and expressive touches brought the melody to life, making it feel both personal and universal. The audience was drawn in completely, experiencing the emotions she was expressing without needing words. The young girl felt a deep connection to everyone in the hall, realizing that music could communicate more than any conversation could. By the time she reached the middle of her performance, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The whispers and laughter were gone, replaced by attentive silence. The audience was fully engaged, hanging on to each note. The owner's expression had softened, his initial mockery replaced with quiet respect. She felt a sense of triumph, knowing that she had taken control of the situation and turned it into something beautiful. Her music had transformed the room, and she could feel the impact of her talent resonating with everyone present. She continued to play, each note more confident than the last, each chord filled with emotion and intent. The melody carried her through a journey of sound, expressing joy, courage, and resilience. The audience was captivated, experiencing the story she was telling through her music. The young girl felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had not only faced the challenge but had turned it into an opportunity to showcase her true abilities. As she approached the final section of her performance, she allowed herself to play with even more freedom and expression. Her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, each note flowing naturally into the next. The audience was mesmerized, caught up in the beauty and emotion of her playing. The owner, who had intended to mock her, was now watching in awe, realizing that he had underestimated her talent. The young girl felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her perseverance and love for music had triumphed over doubt and ridicule. When she finally concluded the piece, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was catching their breath. Then, slowly, applause began to fill the hall, growing louder with each passing second. The young girl smiled, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had faced a challenge meant to humiliate her and had turned it into a moment of triumph. The music had spoken for her, conveying courage, skill, and emotion that words could not express. The audience's reaction was overwhelming, and even the owner could not hide his respect. He had witnessed something unexpected and genuine, and there was no room for mockery now. The young girl felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that she had proven her abilities and stayed true to herself. Her music had transformed the atmosphere, and she had shown that talent, passion, and determination could overcome doubt and negativity. In that moment, she realized that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had discovered the power of her own voice through music, and she knew that no one could diminish it. The experience had strengthened her confidence and fueled her passion. She had faced a challenge, and through skill, courage, and love for her art, she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. The young girl felt a wave of calm wash over her as she prepared for the next section of her performance. The room had changed since she first began. The atmosphere was no longer heavy with judgment. Instead, it was filled with curiosity and anticipation. Every eye was on her, and she felt the electricity in the air as if the piano itself was alive, carrying her emotions across the hall. She let her fingers hover above the keys, listening to the silence around her. It was different from the awkward tension she had felt at the beginning. Now it was filled with expectation, and she could sense the audience leaning in, waiting for the next note. The owner, who had tried so hard to appear confident, was leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her hands. The smirk had disappeared completely, replaced by a mixture of focus and surprise. The girl began to play a new melody, one that was slightly more complex than the simple tune she had started with. Her fingers moved gracefully, pressing the keys with precision and care. She could feel the music flowing through her, guiding her every movement. It was as if the piano knew her intentions, responding to her touch with warmth and clarity. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could not capture. As she continued, she added subtle variations and delicate flourishes that brought the melody to life. The audience was captivated, their eyes fixed on her as they absorbed every nuance. Even those who had been skeptical before were now silent, drawn into the beauty of her performance. The girl felt a quiet thrill, knowing that she had transformed the room with her music. She could sense the owner's surprise, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the piano, on the story she was telling through her notes. The music began to build, growing in intensity and emotion. Her hands moved with confidence and ease, each note flowing naturally into the next. She could feel the rhythm and harmony guiding her, helping her express feelings that were deep and personal. The audience was completely engaged, experiencing the journey she was taking them on through sound. The young girl felt a sense of power, not in a boastful way, but in the knowledge that she could touch hearts with her talent. The owner shifted in his seat, clearly affected by the performance. He had expected to see a nervous girl stumble, but instead, he was witnessing skill, grace, and emotion. The room was silent except for the piano, and the weight of the music seemed to fill every corner. The young girl felt a connection with everyone present, as if the music was speaking directly to each person. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared experience that transcended words. She allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music, letting her fingers move freely across the keys. Each chord, each note, was a reflection of her dedication, her practice, and her love for music. She thought of all the hours she had spent learning, of the quiet moments alone with her piano, and of the joy she felt when creating melodies. Now all that effort was visible in her playing, and she could see the impact it was having on the audience. The melody shifted again, becoming more expressive and nuanced. She introduced small changes in tempo and dynamics, adding depth and character to the piece. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in to catch every subtle detail. She noticed people closing their eyes, swaying slightly to the rhythm, completely absorbed in the music. Even the owner seemed momentarily lost in the performance, his earlier confidence replaced by an almost reverent attention. The young girl felt a sense of freedom as she played, a liberation from the fear and pressure that had weighed on her at the beginning. The piano had become an extension of herself, allowing her to communicate without words. She expressed joy, determination, and a quiet strength that seemed to fill the hall. Every note carried intention, every pause created tension, and every chord conveyed emotion. The audience could feel her heart and soul in the music, and it resonated deeply. As the piece progressed, she began to explore more complex patterns and sequences, demonstrating her skill without ever seeming forced or showy. Her fingers moved with agility and precision, dancing across the keys with grace. The young girl felt a surge of confidence, knowing that she was capable of more than anyone had anticipated. The music was her voice, and it was speaking clearly and powerfully. The audience was captivated, witnessing not just a performance, but a display of talent, passion, and courage. The owner's eyes followed her hands closely, and she could see a flicker of respect in his gaze. He had tried to belittle her, to mock her abilities, but now he was faced with undeniable proof of her talent. The young girl noticed his change in demeanor, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the piano and the story she was telling. Each note was a statement, each chord a declaration of her dedication and love for her art. The room seemed to breathe with the music, each listener caught up in the journey she was leading them on. She played with intention, allowing the melody to rise and fall, to capture both lightness and depth. The audience was completely engaged, following her every move, experiencing the full range of emotions she conveyed. The young girl felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had transformed the initial tension and doubt into admiration and connection. Her performance continued to build, reaching new heights of expression and technical skill. The melody became richer, more layered, with subtle harmonies that added complexity without overwhelming the simplicity of the tune. The audience could sense the care and thoughtfulness behind every choice, and they responded with quiet awe. Even the owner, who had sought to humiliate her, seemed powerless to interrupt the flow of the music. He could only watch as she commanded the room with her talent. The young girl's heart raced with excitement, but it was no longer tied to fear. She felt alive, fully present in the moment, and in tune with the piano. Each note she played was an extension of herself, a reflection of her courage and determination. The audience could feel the sincerity and passion in her performance, and it resonated deeply with them. The room was transformed, filled with the sound of music and the emotions it carried. She reached a particularly delicate section of the piece, where the melody dipped into softer, more intimate tones. Her fingers moved with gentle precision, creating a sense of vulnerability and beauty. The audience leaned in, captivated by the contrast and the depth of expression. Even the owner seemed affected, his attention fixed on the young girl's hands as they moved effortlessly across the keys. It was clear that he had never expected this level of skill and emotion. The girl allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting it guide her through each phrase and passage. She thought of the countless hours she had spent practicing, of the quiet moments when she had played for no one but herself, and of the joy that music had always brought her. Now, all of that dedication was on display, and she could sense the impact it was having on those watching. The audience was moved, not just by her technical skill, but by the emotion and authenticity she conveyed. As the melody rose again, the young girl added subtle flourishes and variations, enhancing the beauty and complexity of the piece. Her hands moved with grace and confidence, each note perfectly placed. The audience was completely absorbed, experiencing the full range of emotions she was expressing. Even the owner, who had intended to mock her, could not hide his amazement. He was witnessing something genuine, something that could not be diminished by doubt or ridicule. The young girl felt a deep sense of connection with the audience, as if the music had bridged the gap between them. Each listener was caught up in the story she was telling, experiencing joy, tension, and resolution through the piano. She had turned a situation meant to humiliate her into a moment of shared beauty and emotion. Her confidence grew with every note, and she played with increasing freedom and expression. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, she allowed herself to fully embrace the music, playing with passion, precision, and heart. The melody built to a powerful climax, capturing the attention and admiration of everyone in the hall. The young girl felt a sense of triumph, knowing that she had faced a challenge and transformed it into an opportunity to shine. The audience was completely engaged, hanging on to each note, and the owner could only watch in awe. When the final chord rang out, the room was silent for a brief moment, as if everyone were catching their breath. Then, applause erupted, growing louder and louder, filling the hall with sound and admiration. The young girl smiled, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had faced a situation meant to mock her and had turned it into a moment of triumph. The music had spoken for her, expressing courage, skill, and emotion that words could never capture. She stood from the piano, her heart racing, and looked around the room. The audience was clapping and cheering, and even the owner had a look of respect on his face. The young girl felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that she had proven her abilities and stayed true to herself. Her music had transformed the room, and she had shown that passion, dedication, and talent could overcome fear and doubt. In that moment, she knew that this experience would stay with her forever, a reminder of her strength and her love for the piano. The young girl felt a sense of calm determination as she returned to the piano for the next part of her performance. The room had already been transformed by her playing. The tension that had been there when she first arrived had vanished. Now, the atmosphere was filled with attention and quiet anticipation. Every person present seemed to be listening closely, eager to hear what she would play next. The owner, who had tried to belittle her, was leaning slightly forward, his eyes fixed on her hands, a hint of curiosity and surprise evident in his expression. She let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, taking a moment to feel the instrument beneath her hands. The piano seemed to welcome her touch, its sound responding to her movements with warmth and clarity. She began with a melody that was slightly more intricate than what she had played before. Each note was deliberate, each chord full of emotion. The young girl could feel the music flowing through her, guiding her every movement, and she let herself become fully immersed in the experience. As she continued, she added gentle embellishments to the melody, small variations that gave the piece more depth and character. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, producing a sound that was both precise and expressive. The audience was captivated, their eyes following her every movement. Even those who had been skeptical or amused at first were now silent, completely absorbed in the performance. The young girl felt a quiet sense of triumph, knowing that she had captured their attention and respect. The owner's expression had changed noticeably. His usual smug confidence was replaced with careful observation, his eyes following the subtle movements of her hands. He had expected to see a nervous girl falter, but instead, he was witnessing skill, emotion, and control. The young girl noticed this change, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the piano, on the music, and on telling the story through each note. The melody grew more expressive, carrying a sense of rising emotion. She allowed herself to play with increasing freedom, letting the music guide her fingers across the keys. The room seemed to respond to her playing. It was as if the very air was alive with the sound of the piano. The audience leaned in, captivated by the flow and emotion of the performance. The young girl felt a sense of empowerment, realizing that she had turned a situation meant to mock her into an opportunity to showcase her talent and passion. As the piece progressed, she began to explore more complex patterns and sequences. Her fingers moved with agility and precision, creating harmonies and rhythms that were both intricate and beautiful. The audience could sense the thought and care behind every note. They were witnessing not just technical skill, but a deep connection to the music, a way of expressing emotion and character that was impossible to ignore. The young girl felt a surge of confidence, knowing that her dedication and love for music were shining through. The owner, who had intended to belittle her, was now captivated. He could not hide the surprise in his eyes as he watched her play. Every note she struck demonstrated poise, skill, and emotional depth. The audience was drawn in completely, experiencing the story she was telling through the piano. The young girl felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that she had overcome the initial fear and was now commanding the room with her performance. She allowed the melody to rise and fall, using dynamics and tempo to create tension and release. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and letting the music move them. The young girl felt a connection with everyone in the room, as if the music was creating a shared understanding and emotion that transcended words. She played with heart and intention, every note reflecting her dedication and courage. The piece became more intricate, with subtle harmonies and rhythmic shifts that added richness without overpowering the simplicity of the original tune. Her fingers danced across the keys with elegance and control, each note perfectly placed. The audience was mesmerized, caught up in the beauty and depth of the performance. Even the owner could not look away, captivated by her talent and the way she had turned a situation designed to humiliate her into a display of skill and emotion. The young girl's confidence continued to grow as she played. She was no longer thinking about the initial fear or the owner's mocking intent. She was fully immersed in the music, allowing it to guide her through each phrase and passage. Her performance was not just about technical skill. It was about expression, emotion, and connection. Every note carried meaning, every chord told a story, and the audience felt every nuance. The melody shifted again, becoming softer and more intimate. Her fingers moved with gentle precision, creating a delicate and emotional sound. The audience leaned in, captivated by the contrast and the depth of feeling. Even the owner, who had sought to mock her, was clearly affected. His attention was fixed on her hands as they moved effortlessly across the keys, unable to interrupt or diminish the power of her music. She allowed herself to feel the emotions of the piece fully, letting them guide her performance. She thought of all the hours she had spent practicing, the quiet moments alone with her piano, and the joy that music had always brought her. Now, all of that dedication and love was evident in her playing, and she could sense the impact it had on the audience. They were moved, not just by her skill, but by the authenticity and emotion she conveyed. The young girl began to add subtle flourishes and variations, enhancing the complexity and beauty of the piece. Her hands moved with confidence and grace, each note perfectly placed. The audience was completely absorbed, following every detail and nuance. The owner, who had tried to mock her, could only watch in awe. He was witnessing something genuine, something that could not be diminished by doubt or ridicule. The young girl felt a deep connection with the audience, as if the music had created a bridge between them. Each listener was caught up in the story she was telling, experiencing joy, tension, and resolution through the piano. She had transformed a situation meant to belittle her into a moment of shared emotion and admiration. Her confidence grew with every note, and she played with increasing freedom and expression. As the piece approached its climax, she allowed herself to fully embrace the music. The melody rose to a powerful and moving height, capturing the attention and admiration of everyone present. The young girl felt a sense of triumph, knowing that she had turned a challenge meant to humiliate her into an opportunity to showcase her true talent. The audience was completely captivated, and even the owner could not hide his respect. Her music had spoken louder than any words, demonstrating skill, passion, and courage. When the final notes resonated through the hall, there was a brief moment of silence. Then, slowly, applause began, growing louder and louder. The young girl smiled, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had faced a situation designed to mock her and had transformed it into a moment of beauty and triumph. The music had expressed everything she could not put into words: courage, dedication, and the power of her talent. The audience continued to applaud, moved by the performance. The owner, who had initially sought to belittle her, now looked on with clear admiration. The young girl felt empowered, knowing that she had proven herself and remained true to her passion. Her music had transformed the atmosphere, captured hearts, and demonstrated that talent and determination could overcome doubt and negativity. She knew that this experience would stay with her forever, a reminder of her strength and the beauty of expressing oneself through music. The young girl's fingers moved effortlessly over the piano keys as she entered the next phase of her performance. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her, every ear attuned to the music. She could feel the energy of the audience, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and anticipation. The tension she had felt when she first arrived had melted away, replaced by a steady focus and a growing confidence. The piano seemed to respond to her, each note ringing clear and vibrant, carrying the emotion she poured into it. She began with a melody that was both strong and delicate, a reflection of the duality she felt inside. Her hands danced over the keys, precise yet fluid, allowing the music to breathe and flow naturally. The audience leaned in, captivated by the beauty of the sound. Even the owner, who had tried to mock her, was now leaning forward slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had expected faltering notes, nervous mistakes, and perhaps embarrassment, but what he saw instead was mastery, poise, and emotion beyond his anticipation. The young girl continued, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both complex and emotionally rich. She added subtle variations to the melody, small flourishes that made the piece uniquely hers. Each note was deliberate, each chord carrying meaning and feeling. The audience could sense her dedication and passion. They were no longer merely observers. They were participants in the story she told through her music. She could feel their attention, their admiration, and it inspired her to give even more of herself to the performance. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself to play with greater freedom. The melody rose and fell, danced lightly in some places, and sank deep in others, creating waves of emotion that resonated through the hall. She felt a surge of energy, a connection between her and the piano that was stronger than ever. The instrument seemed alive under her fingers, echoing her feelings and amplifying them into the space around her. The young girl was not merely playing. She was speaking, telling a story without words, conveying courage, passion, and resilience. The owner's expression continued to shift. He had expected to dominate this moment, to watch someone falter for his amusement, but instead he was witnessing something extraordinary. His eyes followed her hands closely, noting the precision and control, the subtle dynamics, and the emotion behind every note. There was no room for mockery now. There was only admiration. The audience too was completely engaged, and some had even stopped moving, hanging on every phrase, every chord, every pause. The young girl could feel their attention as a tangible force, carrying her forward, urging her to keep pushing her limits. She began to build towards the climax of the piece, gradually increasing the intensity of her playing. Her fingers moved with confidence and elegance, creating a rich and intricate tapestry of sound. The melody intertwined with harmonies. The rhythm danced lightly yet powerfully, and the hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of the music. Each note was a step in a journey, each chord a turning point. She felt completely in control, yet free, allowing the music to guide her while infusing it with her own expression. The audience was fully absorbed. Some closed their eyes to better feel the music, while others watched intently, mesmerized by the skill and emotion on display. The young girl's performance had transformed the atmosphere of the room. What had started as an intimidating situation meant to humiliate her had become a moment of shared beauty and awe. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had turned the challenge into an opportunity to shine. The melody shifted to softer, more intimate tones for a moment, drawing the audience closer emotionally. Her fingers moved with gentle precision, creating a feeling of vulnerability and honesty. The contrast between the delicate passages and the stronger, more expressive moments added depth to the performance. The young girl could feel the emotions of the room, sensing how the audience was responding. She allowed herself to play fully from the heart, knowing that authenticity was more powerful than perfection. The music gradually built again, each note stronger, more confident, and more expressive. She added subtle flourishes and variations, demonstrating her skill and creativity without overwhelming the melody. The audience was captivated, following every movement of her hands, every rise and fall in the music. Even the owner could no longer hide his respect. He had tried to mock her, but she had turned the tables completely, proving that talent and determination could not be diminished. She reached a section where the melody soared, high and expressive, demanding attention and focus. Her fingers moved with speed and precision, yet every note was deliberate and meaningful. The audience felt the intensity, leaning forward, completely immersed in the experience. The young girl could sense the emotional impact she was having and felt a mix of exhilaration and responsibility. She was not just performing. She was creating a connection, a shared journey through sound. The piano responded to her touch, producing rich and resonant tones that filled every corner of the hall. She felt a deep bond with the instrument, as if it understood her thoughts and feelings and echoed them back to the audience. Each chord carried weight, each pause held meaning. The young girl's confidence soared as she realized the full power of her own expression. The audience was hanging on every note, completely captivated, and even the owner seemed to have forgotten to breathe, caught in the spell of her music. She played on, her hands moving with grace and skill, the music flowing effortlessly. She introduced subtle changes in tempo and dynamics, adding tension and release, creating a sense of journey within the piece. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, closing their eyes, swaying slightly, completely absorbed in the performance. The young girl felt a profound connection with them, a shared experience that transcended words. She had turned a moment that could have been humiliating into a display of courage, talent, and artistry. The music began to build towards the final moments, the climax of the piece. She played with intensity and passion, her fingers moving over the keys with speed and precision. The melody intertwined with harmonies, creating a rich and powerful sound that filled the room. The audience was spellbound, completely captivated by the performance. The young girl felt a sense of triumph, knowing that she had faced the challenge, overcome fear, and created something truly memorable. The owner, who had hoped to see her stumble, could only watch in awe. His initial intention to mock her had completely failed. Instead, he was witnessing the full extent of her talent, skill, and emotion. He could not interrupt, could not diminish the performance, and could only acknowledge the beauty of what he had underestimated. The young girl felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had not only proven herself, but had also touched the hearts of everyone in the room. As the final notes approached, she allowed herself to play with full expression and power. The music soared, filling the hall with a sense of completion and resolution. Every note was deliberate, every chord full of emotion. The audience was captivated, experiencing the full range of feelings she conveyed. The young girl felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that she had turned a situation designed to belittle her into a moment of beauty, admiration, and shared emotion. When the last chord rang out, the room was silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then, applause erupted, loud and genuine, filling the hall with sound and energy. The young girl smiled, feeling relief, pride, and joy. She had faced a challenge, a test designed to mock her, and had turned it into a triumphant display of talent and emotion. Her music had spoken for her, conveying courage, dedication, and the power of her skill. The audience continued to applaud, some standing, some cheering, all moved by the performance. The owner, who had tried to belittle her, now looked on with clear respect and admiration. The young girl felt empowered, knowing that she had proven herself and remained true to her passion. Her music had transformed the room, captured hearts, and demonstrated that skill, determination, and courage could overcome doubt and negativity. This moment would stay with her forever, a reminder of her strength and the power of expressing oneself through music. The young girl felt a quiet sense of accomplishment as she lowered her hands from the piano keys. The final notes of her performance still lingered in the air, echoing softly around the hall. The audience remained silent for a brief moment, as if absorbing the full impact of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, growing louder and more enthusiastic. Some people stood, clapping and cheering, while others smiled broadly, clearly moved by the performance. The girl's heart swelled with a mixture of pride, relief, and joy. She had faced a challenge designed to humiliate her, and she had turned it into a triumph. The owner, who had once looked so certain of her failure, now had a thoughtful expression. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced with respect and perhaps a hint of disbelief. He had expected to see her stumble, to see nerves take over and mistakes reveal themselves. Instead, she had performed with confidence, skill, and emotion that surpassed his expectations. The young girl noticed the change in him, but she did not let it distract her. She had given her best, and the reaction of the audience was enough to affirm her success. She took a small bow, acknowledging the applause, feeling the warmth of their appreciation. The sound of clapping and cheering filled the room, mingling with the lingering resonance of the piano. The young girl felt a deep sense of connection to everyone present. For a moment, it was no longer about the challenge or the owner's intentions. It was about music and its ability to bring people together. She could sense the emotions of the audience, the admiration, the surprise, and the genuine appreciation for her talent. Walking away from the piano, she allowed herself to take a deep breath, feeling the release of tension that had built up during the performance. The room, once intimidating and filled with whispers of mockery, now felt welcoming and alive. People who had doubted her or come expecting entertainment at her expense were now witnesses to her talent, her dedication, and her courage. She had turned a potentially humiliating moment into a display of artistry and personal strength. The owner approached cautiously, his usual commanding presence tempered by the recognition of her ability. He offered a nod of respect, a silent acknowledgement that he had underestimated her. The young girl returned the gesture, understanding that sometimes people learn their own lessons through the actions of others. His previous attempts to belittle her had failed, and she had demonstrated that skill, passion, and determination could not be diminished by mockery or doubt. As the audience continued to applaud, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the music. She had proven to herself that fear and intimidation could be overcome. She had taken a situation designed to make her feel small and turned it into a moment of empowerment. Each note she had played, each chord she had pressed, had been an expression of her dedication and love for her art. The music had spoken for her when words could not, communicating courage, resilience, and authenticity. The young girl glanced around the hall, taking in the faces of those who had watched her perform. Some were smiling, others were wiping away small tears, clearly moved by the depth of emotion in the music. The experience had created a bond between her and the audience, a shared moment of understanding and admiration. She felt proud not only of her technical skill but also of her ability to convey feeling and connect with people through her performance. She stepped back toward the piano once more, allowing herself a final moment with the instrument that had carried her through the challenge. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, remembering the journey she had taken from fear to confidence. She thought about all the hours of practice, the quiet moments of learning, and the times she had played simply for the love of music. Those moments had prepared her for this day, for this performance, and she felt gratitude for every experience that had led her here. The audience remained attentive, sensing that the performance had reached its conclusion but also feeling the lingering presence of the music. The young girl took a small bow once more, smiling softly. She had not only played the piano, she had shared a piece of herself. The applause that followed was sincere and heartfelt, a recognition of her talent, her dedication, and the courage it had taken to perform under pressure. The owner spoke quietly, his tone measured but genuine. He admitted that he had misjudged her and expressed admiration for her skill and composure. The young girl listened calmly, acknowledging his words with a nod. She had faced his challenge without faltering, and his recognition, though not necessary for her validation, was a reminder that even those who doubt can be surprised and changed by talent and determination. As the hall began to settle, the young girl felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause or praise. She had taken control of the situation, transformed fear into confidence, and shown that music could communicate in ways words could not. She had faced intimidation and emerged stronger, not just as a performer, but as a person who understood the value of perseverance, focus, and staying true to oneself. She slowly walked to the edge of the stage, her eyes meeting those of the audience. There was an unspoken connection, a shared understanding that they had witnessed something genuine and extraordinary. The experience had left a lasting impression, not only on them but on her as well. She realized that the courage she had discovered today would remain with her, guiding her in future challenges and performances. The young girl reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the nervous steps into the grand hall to the confident mastery of the piano, she had grown in ways she had not anticipated. The experience had taught her that fear could be transformed into focus, that doubt could be met with determination, and that even the most intimidating situations could be turned into opportunities for growth and expression. As the applause began to fade, she allowed herself to savor the moment. The music had done more than fill the room. It had created a bridge between herself and the audience, a shared experience of emotion and admiration. She felt proud, not just of her performance, but of her ability to rise above fear and expectation. The challenge she had faced had become a defining moment, one that would shape her confidence and her approach to music for years to come. The owner gave her a final nod, his expression softened by respect. The young girl acknowledged it quietly, feeling a sense of closure and accomplishment. She had faced someone who had intended to belittle her, and through her talent, focus, and passion, she had emerged victorious. The recognition from the audience and even the owner was a testament to her perseverance and skill. As she stepped away from the piano and toward the exit of the hall, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that this performance was not just about the music or the applause. It was about proving to herself that she could face challenges and excel. She had discovered her own strength, her ability to stay true to her art, and the impact that talent and emotion could have on those around her. The young girl left the hall with a heart full of pride and a mind full of determination. She knew that future challenges would come, but she had experienced the power of perseverance and the reward of expressing herself fully. The memory of this performance, the applause, and the admiration of the audience would stay with her, reminding her of the courage and skill that had carried her through. In that moment, she understood that talent was only part of the journey. Confidence, determination, and the willingness to embrace challenges were equally important. She had taken a situation meant to mock her and transformed it into a celebration of her abilities and passion. The young girl walked into the future with a newfound understanding of herself, ready to face whatever challenges came next, knowing that she had the courage, skill, and heart to overcome them.